In this video, we'll build a 3-tier Windows desktop application. Instead of a web application, I think it'll be a little bit easier for you to debug this and get it working. So choose a Windows form app, C# and Windows. Click Next, and let's call this 3-tier. I've already built it once, so I'm going to add a -2 to it. I'm going to make sure that I have .NET 6 as the framework selected. And from here, you'll want to rebuild your form similar to how you built the form in the 1-tier project. I'm going to pause and do that, and we'll get back when the form is created. Okay, I've got the form built. Now the next thing I want to do is build the other 2 tiers. I've right mouse clicked on the solution and come down to Add, and I'm going to add a new project. This will be a class library in C#. Click Next, and let's call this the Data Access tier. So make sure it agrees with the same .NET framework. I'm going to modify the name of the class to Phone Data Tier. Save that. I'll rename the class over here to Phone Data Tier. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have a method in the phone data tier that's called save phone number. So it's going to be public, and I'll return a Boolean value. It will return true if it worked and false if it did not work. So for now, that's all I'm going to do for this tier. We'll keep working on it as we continue. Let's now come over to Solution Explorer and add our middle tier. So I'm going to right mouse click, again going to add new project, and it's going to be class library, and we'll call this the phone middle tier. .NET Framework 6. Change this to phone business tier. Now the phone middle tier will hold the data in between the user interface and the back end. This is the middle tier. So normally if you were collecting customer data such as last name, first name, address, email, phone, you would be creating fields and properties for each of those items. So the only thing we're collecting is the phone number. So I'm going to create some private fields. That's what a field is. It's the private variable that holds the data of the object. So my private field variable is kind of accustomed to precede that with an underscore. It's a readability thing. The public's going to get the data from the properties of the class using getters and setters. In C#, what you're going to do is you're going to create and it wrote it for me actually. So that's all that I need to do right here for my property called phone number. Many times there's extra validation that you want to do, but we're keeping it simple. We won't do that. And then one other thing that is going to be the job of this class is to take the phone number that's been stored in the object, and then if you want to save it. So let's create a method. I'm also going to call it save phone. So what it's going to do is I'm going to have it save the phone number that's stored here. Create a Boolean variable. I'm going to just return true so far. So what this is called is stubbing in the method, is for me to pull all the pieces together to see if these 3 different layers can communicate with one another. What I'm going to do now is to save all my files, And then I'm going to right mouse click on the data access tier and build it. That's going to create the DLL file that will be available to my middle tier. So I'm going to build that, and that's going to create it and build that. So I went to each of my projects and did a build. I would like the middle phone tier to be able to access the data tier. So I'm going to right mouse click on the middle tier project and add a project reference. Since I've been doing this, they're already showing up. So in my project solution, it's already sees that I have a data access tier. If you can't find it, you can browse to it. I called this 3-tier app 2. There's my data access tier. And you'll find it in the binary debug.net 6 DLL. So DLL file is the dynamic linked library file that contains the compiled source code. So you can do it either way. Okay. Next, I want to come over to the 3-tier app and do the same thing. I want to add a reference to the middle. So it's telling me I have these two that I can reference just in the solution itself. If you decide not to put the projects in the same solution, that's okay. You browse to it just like you saw me do that earlier. And I'm going to do a build to make sure everything is working fine, and it is. So the next thing I'd like to do is put some code in this submit button. Double click on the submit button, created a variable for the phone number, and then I've stored whatever in the mask text box. You would normally do some additional validation to make sure it's not null before you would do that. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to be able to see if I can access this middle tier. But to do that, I'm going to come up and add a using directive. Now, for this using directive, it's like adding an import in Java, if you've done Java. It's going to use the namespace. So it's the namespace that you will use in your using directive. Okay, so I have my using directive, phone, middle tier. Now I'm going to now try to create an instance of that phone middle tier using the name of the class. And the name of my class is phone business tier. I know these similar names can get confusing. So the name of my class is phone business tier. And then give it a name. Just call it phone. And then a new phone business tier. So if you can get this far when you build your user interface tier, then you're able to talk. They're able to talk. It did build. If I can execute this and click on submit, and it doesn't crash, because that's all it's going to do so far. I haven't written any other code. Then I know that it did, that this tier is able to communicate to the other tier. So what I want to do is to assign a phone number to the property. So this is the phone number property that you will see right here. I'm assigning a value to it. It's going to run the get. Now I would like also to take that phone object and run the method called save phone. Now that method returns a Boolean value. I'm going to come up here and create a variable called saved. And I will assign to saved that Boolean value. If saved is true, then I'm going to use this message box object. In real life, you wouldn't do this. Phone saved. Also, when it's true, I'm going to take that phone mask text box and reset it to null. Next is my else. What's going to happen if saved returns false is it didn't save. So I'm just going to let them know that the phone did not save. Error saving phone. Okay, and I think that's it so far. So far we've got this interface tier, level 1 tier, the interface tier, being able to communicate to the phone middle tier, and it is assigning a value to this property, and it's saving the phone. Notice it should always return true. It's not actually saving the phone yet. I'm just testing it. So let me run my application, enter a number. And it says phone saved. Looks like I used the wrong input mask. Okay, the next thing I do want to do is to go to my data tier. And let's go ahead and write the logic to actually save the phone number. And it was giving a red squiggly line because it's saying, wait a minute, you're saying you're returning a true or a false, and you haven't returned a true or false in every possible path. Well, now we have. So it's really similar logic to the 1 tier. This is the tier now accessing the text file. So we're creating a path variable and assigning the path to that same text file we created in the first 1 tier application. We're using the StreamWriter object to append to that. And if it gets this far without blowing up, it's true that it worked. Otherwise, in the catch, it must have blown up, and we're going to add a false. I'm going to go ahead and rebuild that. And then I'm going to go over to my middle tier and make sure that that has, I think we already did that, didn't we? Sure that that has the project reference to the data access tier. It does. And I'm going to come up here and put that using directive in here. Using the data access tier. And that goes above the namespace. So now I have this code interfacing with the middle tier, which is a class containing properties and methods about a phone number. Then the middle tier is interfacing with the data tier. Well, let me get to the middle tier. The middle tier is going to interface with the data tier in the same phone. So to interface with the data tier, we're going to have to create an instance of the data tier. Okay, so again, I'm going to use a Boolean variable since it's returning Boolean and saying so far it hasn't saved. Then I'm going to try to create an instance of the data tier. My data tier name is phone data tier. Oh, wonderful. So try to create an instance of the data tier, call the method name, save phone number, send the private phone number variable to it, or even better still, you can send this dot phone number, which is the property. And if phone was saved, it's going to return true, else it's going to return false. Or if it blows up, then it didn't get saved, it's going to return false. So let's save and recompile this. And let's test our application. Here's my application. I'm going to do 8745. Well, I have an error here. It says phone saved. So it did not blow up. Wonderful. I have an error because I did the input mask wrong. But let's go ahead and open up that file and see if it saved that weird looking phone number. So I'm going to go to Open, File. It's actually going to be back in my one here. See, I've been working on this a lot. And it did. There's the file that it just saved. So that is our 3-tier application. The next thing I want you to do is to bundle all these up. I'm in Windows Explorer. Here are my 3 solution folders. Simply click on each solution folder, zip them up, send to zip, and that solution folder will contain all of the files needed for me to go ahead and test that you've done this correctly. So submit those 3 zip files for your project. Hope you have fun.